All right, hello, welcome everybody. My name is Patrick Payne, and I'm here today to demonstrate how to create a simple to-do app using our MV connector RESTful services. Now, we've had a lot of requests on how would I actually build an application. So in this demonstration, I'm not only going to build the REST services, but I'm also going to build a simple JavaScript-based front-end application that will run totally in the browser, what's called a single page application. For this demonstration, I'm going to do the development on JBase for Windows to give you an opportunity to see how JBase works and how its native features work. But everything I am doing here will work with the standard MV connector on other platforms such as D3, Universe, Unidata, OpenQM. But for purposes of this demo, I'm going to do it all on local JBase, talking on this laptop directly to JBase on this machine. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jump in to JBase and get the JBase app server up and running. And on JBase, we actually have this all built in and it runs on JAgent. If you're on another platform, it'll be running on our MV connector through a program called MV App Server. And on another video, I'll show you how to fire that up. But in the end, everything works the same for the application. So here on Windows, we just type in JB and we type in the name of our account, which I've already created, and it's called Demos. And we are now in our demo account. And on JBase, everything is native to the operating system. So really what you're seeing is what's called JShell. You can actually go right to Windows and see all your same files in the account. JShell is just there to make it work and operate more like PIC. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a to-do app. And very simple application. We're only going to have about 3 fields: date, time, and the to-do item. I have, for purposes of this demonstration, have already created the file. So I call it todo.file. I already have 2 test items in it, and I've also created 3 dictionary items. So list dictionary of to-do file. If you're doing this demonstration, you'll have to go ahead and create this file on your system, and then create these 3 dictionaries, which are very straightforward. To-do date, to-do time, and to-do message. Date is attribute 1, time is attribute 2, and message is attribute 3. And the last item is a next ID, whereas you're adding new items, this is what increments the ID. So there's your file. I'll leave it up to you to go ahead and create that file and get some items in there. I created a couple test items. So if I list to-do file, to-do date, to-do time, to-do message, here's a couple sample items. So now what we want to do is create a program file. I like to create my own BP files where I will store my source code. So I am going to go ahead and create, and this on JBase, a to-do BP file, and we're going to do a type of UD. This is on JBase, and in JBase this creates it as a directory versus an actual PIC hash file. And what this allows us to do is on this machine I can go ahead and pull up any editor I like to use and browse that directory and do my coding in that editor versus using a line editor. In JBase, when you compile programs, they will actually create a $sign appended with your file name for an intermediate source, because remember JBase compiles to C. I don't like those showing up in my BB file, so I will create a to-do BP object file. So a second data section off that file, a type of UD. And when JBase compiles programs, it will not put that $sign item in your main BP file, it'll put in the object directory. I like to do that to keep things clean. So now we created our to-do BP file. Now what I'm going to do is I like to use an editor called Sublime. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Sublime. And because I already had it open, it's actually already open to my demos directory with all the files I have in there, and any pick files that have been created as directory items are showing right up here as directories. And if I scroll down, I will see my new to-do BP file right there. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our first program, and I'm going to keep it real simple right now, which is I'm just going to put a comment at the top to get it saved. So I'm going to say my test to do rest function. I'm going to tell it to save it. And I'm going to call this to do.routine. First, we're going to go ahead and create it here. I'm not sure why that did that. So we're going to go use our normal JED editor, JED to-do.bp, to-do.routine, my first rest function. Now when I go up here, it should be there. I should be able now to, and it works. When you use something like Sublime, I'm keeping things real simple. You can go over here and change its language file, and if you pick VBScript, it's not too bad at doing syntax highlighting correctly for pick basic. So we have so far created our stub program to start a REST function. The final thing we have to do, because we're running on JBase, is we need to fire up our actual REST server. On JBase, this can be a service and be running, but for demo purposes and as you're doing development, I quite often like to run it right from the command line. And this is not too unlike how Node or other languages work, where you actually would run the programs. Therefore, any debugging output and stuff can actually come in right there on the window. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into JBase. By going in here, I've already got my environment set up. So now I can just run the JBase JAgent program, which is JBase_agent. Then we type in where our config file, and there is a default config file that comes with the system, and we're gonna say it's in JBase current version config JAgent config. So now the testing server is up and running. I'm then going to go ahead and open up my browser and make sure it's working. And by default, the JBase one will fire up on port 2002, actually 20002. Whereas if you're using the other cross-platform versions, which is using NVApp server, that will actually start up on port 8180. So to test it, I'm going to go to localhost 20002. API wrest test. This is a built-in testing REST service that comes with both products. You can see it communicate down there. And what's nice about this tool is it will throw out a little bit of debugging information and let you know that the service is up and running and where it's working, and you can use it to debug as you're sending cookies and vars and things in. So here it's up working, and we know the server's working. So now we've got a JBase window here to do our development. We got the web server up and running, and we can start building our service. Now we started working on our program, which is over here in the to-do BP. So we're going to call our function, we'll just call it to-do. It should come back and say it does not exist. And the way we export a function is we have a separate file called wdb resource, and the syntax is the directive, in this case it's API asterisk, and what we want to call it in this case is to do it all in uppercase. Attribute 1 is just a P. Attribute 2 is a description, which is this going to be to do test program. the actual catalog program that we wish to run, in our case we call it todo.routine. Leave 4 blank, 5, you need to put a 1, and 6 is 1. These are config options. This product has actually been around for 10-15 years, doing things that we have called a dashboard and Bravo reports and some other products we have, and therefore to maintain backwards compatibility, those switches do things for the older products. For what we're doing, we always just put 1 in both those fields. In the future, we may even have more features, and there'll be more documentation around this as we add more features. So we file that away. Right here from Tickle, we can actually, first of all, make sure we have compiled our program. So it's basic todo.bp, todo.routine. Then we catalog it. We're on JBase. Because it's creating C programs, you have to always do a basic and a catalog. The actual basic function, if I was to tell them verbose, you'll actually see it running the compiler, the C compile on the machine, which does the first step, and then the final linking is done by the catalog statement. So now we can do to-do routine. And remember, we didn't actually have it do anything. So if we were to, let's say, go back over here and actually tell it to say something, and I'm going to say call W send to-do routine worked. And when you see these functions, these are subroutines that we have supplied that is going to be giving you access to all the web functions. So we'll have ones for getting cookies, headers, body, sending information back to the browser. So right now we're just going to take this one, save it away, go back over here. Let's look at our stack history. Let's just go back up and compile it and catalog again. Now when I run it, it worked. Again, to show neat things that JBase can do, we can actually, because it is a C program, we can actually be at the C prompt and it works, because it is actually a Windows program at this point and not really just a PIC program. So now that it's up and running, we are going to go back to our browser, and there's our output. So we've now got the stub of the program going. It was just a test function. What we're going to do next is actually start building out our actual application. And for this purpose, I am going to, for front-end development, there's lots of tools out there available. I'm going to show you one called App Studio by a company called NS Basic. It's a fully WYSIWYG type IDE for building applications. In the end, it creates JavaScript applications that will load up in the browser. It's primarily based on jQuery. It has Bootstrap support. So think of this as a competitor for something like Angular or any other development environment. I like to use it because it's very easy to use. It looks a lot like Visual Basic from the old days, and it actually allows you to program in BASIC. And it's more of a Visual Basic than our PIC Basic, but it's close enough. And behind the scenes, it just transpiles it into JavaScript. Load up App Studio. I already have it loaded here. And first thing we want to do is we're going to create a new project. It's going to be a JavaScript. It by default lets you pick what you want your layout to be. We're going to pick a small responsive one. This product was had its original, it came out of building mobile apps, but since mobile apps today have an option of being Bootstrap HTML5 apps, we can use this product to create normal HTML5 web applications too. So I'm going to pick this responsive one because that's where Bootstrap is at. First thing I'm going to do is go over here to the project properties and name it, and we're going to call this the to-do application version 1.0. You can do copyrights. This is all your high-level stuff, but we're going to do that, and then we're just going to go in and do a project save as, so we can choose our file name. I'll go where I usually save applications and call this my to-do application and save it away. So now what we want to do is actually start building our application. And you see over here we have our forms. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go change the size of the form. I want it to be a slightly bigger. We'll make it say 600 by 400. Let's go a little bigger. And then up here you can do what you want as design height. The truth is, and let's say that say the width should be 4, let's say 50, like that, 450. It can actually create mobile apps, and so some of this stuff is more pertinent towards if it compiles down and creates you an actual app versus a web page. But what it does do is it affects, as you're doing the design, what size your palette is you're working on here. So I've got that set up, and first thing we're going to do is put a header on here. And see, it's drag and drop. So now I can go over here and click on header, and I can go through here, and let's say, for example, I want the background to be black. I want the color to be white. We're going to go in here and say my to-do application. So now we've got that. And just to see what we're doing here is that we can now at any point click and say start in browser, and it runs our web application. Now, to build up our application, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put in a list group so we can start listing our to-do items that we have over in the pick side. So we do that. There's our control here. I actually want to embed it within a panel, so I'll just go down here and drag a panel control on here. Take this, drag it, and put it in there. Now it's within a panel control. So I'll go up to the panel first, and we will change its view to primary, which does default colors for it. We'll go over here and say the footer should be number of items found. We are going to let's rename it. We'll call it our to-do panel. Our position is I'm going to change it to relative. These are all things you'll learn as you get more and more into web. You can take entire books and learn about HTML5, Bootstrap, and CSS. All this is affecting. It's doing a lot of this work for you. We take the value out because in this case, the panel, I've embedded this list control in the panel. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to go over here and start setting up our list control. So first thing I'm going to do is say the width should be auto, so it goes for the full width. I'm going to go down here and change its name to be to do list group, and we should be done with that. So we've got a basic thing here. We can now go and tell it to start up in the browser again. And as you can see, as we scroll this around, it resizes. So classic Bootstrap, and I've done everything so far, just drag and drop and filling out options. Now we're going to start doing some coding. So I'm going to click right here and go over to the code box. And what we need to do is start building out our application and start calling over to pick, where we're then going to build REST services to call in. So let me get started on the code. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a global variable to tell us where our URL of our server is. So in this case, I'm going to say the URL is localhost 2002 API to do. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a function, and we'll call it function get all to-dos. Now, the neat thing is, remember, everything we're writing here is going to run in the browser. And there's a built-in function here called console log that you can send things to the debugger in the browser while you're running the application, testing application. Very, very helpful on testing. So we're going to go in here to say, hey, starting the get all to-dos. Kind of lets me know where I'm at in my program. And it's going to be real simple. We're going to do an Ajax, which is a function built into this tool. It's a front end to the standard jQuery Ajax function. This is the glue of everything that works within the new browser stuff. Ajax will make a web call over to our server, and what we want to do is say, hey, use our URL that we had saved up above. We want to do a get. There's 3 or 4 different web types, and for standard RESTful services, you do a get, which is the same as you type into URL bar that item. The data you're going to send, which is nothing. And then, because this is a true event-driven language, we have to say what is the function to call when this Ajax call is done. So we'll go in here and say get all to-dos response. We end our function. And then we have to create the function get all to-dos response. It will get returned the response. I'm going to say, hey, console log that I'm in get all response. You'll find me doing a lot of this so I know what's going on. Again, this is all personal preference on how you do your debugging and your coding. I'm just going to show you how I do it. Then I'm also going to tell it to shoot off the response that we get and end our function. So real simple. We've only created a couple lines of code. And then I'm going to go up here at the top and say get all to-dos. If you're ever coding other languages, this is kind of like your main area up here. So all this code will always execute when the page goes. These are your functions. So what I'm basically telling it to do is when this thing fires up, set this URL, then run this function. There's my function. And when that function comes back, it'll run this function. Now we're going to fire it up in the browser. I'm going to close these old ones. Now I'm using Chrome. So purpose of this demo, I'm going to show you everything from a Chrome standpoint. Chrome has got one of the best debuggers in it because Google has pioneered most of this technology. So I highly recommend you use Google. Firefox and Internet Explorer have these features, but I'm going to demonstrate them from the Google standpoint. So we're going to go in and turn on developer tools. And based on how your product is configured, can be where this debugger shows up. You can actually resize it. You can actually go over here and say where it's at. It can be undocked, dock to the bottom, right, left. I'm going to use it from the right. So we bring this up. I'm going to tell it to refresh. And you'll actually see it. Remember we had those statements we set in our program. Hey, I want you to console log starting. You will see that come out right there. Starting get to-dos, get response. And then it throws out errors. And as I go through this, I'm going to show you, again, this has nothing to do with our product. These are classic security items that the web has developed to deal with certain exploits that people have figured out how to do with web applications. So as I go through the product and I'm showing you this error, if you were programming in Node or programming in Microsoft, they would have their commands and their language for setting these same things. And a very important thing we did with the tool was we gave you access to the entire protocol. So as these things are adjusting and changing, and trust me, it's very fluid, and these things are being added to and enhanced, you're able to go right into our RESTful services and say, oh, now it's these headers that control this type of security access, and the latest version of Google Chrome now is requiring this, therefore I can quickly add it to my RESTful programs. And again, this is no different than what anybody's doing with Node or any other languages. So it's basically saying, hey, I can't run that RESTful service because there's no access control allow origin header on the resource. Now, if we look at the other things that the debugger has, we'll scroll this out so you can see them. Network is the other important one. As you look through all these options, anytime this browser, and we'll click to all here, is doing stuff, it's showing you here all the requests it did. So in this case, it loaded our page, all the required stuff within it. Shows you how long it takes and what all it loaded. Up here you can filter them. XHR is going to be all of our RESTful, our AJAX functions. So usually that's the one I care about. I click there and you can see that request. So when this AJAX function fired, it created this request. I can go over here and I'll click on it and look at what we did. And this is the headers. I can scroll through here and see the request I did in, look at the response. And what this is telling us is this error here was refusing to let the response piece come back. Now what you can do is you can double click right here on it, and here comes the function. But since it's not producing an actual HTML thing, this is producing an error. So what we'll now do is we'll go over to our program, and just for purposes of this test, let's make it return actual JSON. So we're going to go in here and say status, okay. We will now go back over here, and since I always do basic and compile, I actually created my own little program called BC that does always a basic and a compile. So I'm going to go in here and run that versus constantly doing the basic and compile. So BC, and I'm going to say to do routine. And see, it now throws out JSON. So now if I go back over here and tell this to run again, let's see what it does. So now you can see the response. And what's nice about, again, each one of the editors do this a little differently. I can click here on preview and actually see it now as an object, which is the whole power of JSON. And currently they say it has one variable and it equals okay. We can see the raw response here. And then again, we can see the headers. Remember, up here, you're going to see that what it did was a get. And again, we can double click here and run it right in the browser. And there it is. Again, your browser may not show it exactly like this. I'm in Chrome. I'm using a plugin that will prettify and make the JSON look pretty. If you don't have that in, it'll just be mushed at the top. Okay, so we're calling in. We can now look at our console. We were throwing out errors. And see, this is complaining here that there's no access control allow origin header is present on the request. Then we see that we're in our get response, and then you see the actual response that came back. And the truth is, it didn't respond with everything back to me because of that error up top. So how do I resolve that issue? Well, all I do is I go up and we start building out our program. And the truth is, what we should be doing is, first of all, setting our content. So w set content type, and we're going to set it to application JSON, because we're going to send back JSON. This tells the returning system what type of stuff we're sending back. Then we need to set a header. And access, control, allow, origin. Now I have a whole another videos that can talk about this. There's good documentation out there that talks about these items. I want to be clear here is I'm basically turning off some security when I do this, and it's because we're doing this in development. When you're doing this type of stuff, your HTML, your application came from a URL. Then when you do AJAX calls, you should be calling exactly the same site. And as long as those two things are exactly the same, then you're okay and all the security works. But if your web page is attempting to call an AJAX service that's at a different URL, it's what's called CORS. You're actually doing cross-domain calling. And so there's built-in security that says, hey, by default, that's not allowed. Now what's happening here is that we're doing development work. And therefore, every time App Studio says, hey, I'm going to run this page, see, it's really doing it from localhost, and this product has fired up its own web server on 64.302. When we're making our AJAX calls talking to our server that's running on JBase, it's port 2002. So those are different. Even though the IP is the same, the ports are different, so it kicks in this rule. So as we're doing development work, and again, this is very common and normal as even in Node or any other language, is that you have to set these things up. As you go to production, you'll actually take those items back out because you'll be deploying on the same server. It should be the same IP. What I did is I told it to allow it from anywhere. If you do need to have some differences, you're able to go in here and say, hey, I only allow this if it calls this particular IP and this particular port. So again, you have a lot of power and control here. And as I said, there's entire documents and stuff out there. Again, not specific to our product. This is all standard REST, and the things you're learning here is standard development. So if you were using any other environment, it'd all be the same. So I go in here, I save this, I go over here and compile my routine. I like to run it from here so I can actually see errors, and you can see here I actually spelt it wrong. So I'm going to go over here and say, it's not sent, but it's set content type. So now she's run. Now I'm going to go back to my application, and because we didn't change anything in this application, we should be able just to go right back up here and refresh this page. I'm going to clear the console out and clear the network out. So we have a clean screen. I'm going to run it again. And we now have no error. And so when it kicked out here and console logged our response, there's the response. So in about 4 lines of code here, and about 3 to 4 lines of code here, we have these two things talking to each other. So now let's move on to actually making this do something. On this side, we need to start building out our functions to return data. And the first one we're doing is a get. And what a get is going to do is it'll return a list of all of our to-do items. So I'm going to do a couple housekeeping things here. First thing we're going to do is open up our file. So let's open our file. Actually, first what I want to do is when we send back stuff, it has to be in JSON, and we actually have an object library to help you with the creation of objects. So you don't have to figure out the JSON and do all the encoding. And it's called WObject. So call WObject, and we want to first build our response object. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we're going to build it, and what do we want to call it here? And we're going to call it response object. And then the next command is, what is the function you want to do? And we have documentation online that shows all this stuff, what all the variable parameters are. So what I want to do here is I'm going to create an object from a string. So basically I'm creating a blank, brand new blank object. The next parameter is to be left blank because it's usually like a second parameter for set and other functions. The next parameter is the value, and in this case we're passing in the JSON we wish to parse. Now to create a blank object, I just put in bracket bracket and it'll create a blank object. The next one is an options, we're leaving that blank, and then if we got any errors. So that will create us a response object. Now to duplicate what we did before, which was we're going to have at the I create an end area here where I like to print out the status of what the call did. So I'm going to go up here and say the status code, let's call this a JSON status equals OK. So we had a successful run, and then we're going to say JSON status message will equal nothing for right now. Then at the end of the program, we are going to call WObject, our same response object. We're going to set a string. Now remember, in PIC, everything's strings, but in JSON you can have integers and there's arrays, and you can build more stuff. But set, as if you leave set by itself, it will always do a string. Set.string is redundant. Then you can also do set boolean, set integer, and other items, or set number. Again, all that's in the documentation. So we're going to say set string, and then what we want to call it, in this case, is what's going to be called status. And we're going to put our JSON status in there. Remember that was options, r-air. We're going to set the other item in there, which was response.object, set string, status message, JSON status message, option r-air. So we've now created an object. We are now going to convert it back to JSON. So toString, no option there. This is going to be our response JSON, so that's where it returns the JSON. Option error. Then we're going to wsend our response JSON, and end of our program. So let's see how well I did. It's compiled. Let's run it. And there's our JSON output. So it did all that for you. So now, if I go back to our application and I refresh it again, there is our response. And remember, I told you to debug print. So there it is, and you see it in JSON, but you can click right here and it lists it out in it's an object now. So there's status message. Remember when I talked in my video that we're talking about objects here, and JSON's just a EDI format describing objects. So there's our two items. So we got back something called response, and therefore response.status equals OK, and response.status message is blank. So now we've called farther in the program. All right, now let's move on to actually getting our REST service to return back all of our task items. This would be your standard get. This is your selection that gets back selections of records. So let's go back to our code. And up here, the first thing we're going to do is get what type of, well, actually first let's open up our files. So, and we'll show some error handling. So we're going to say open our to-do file. And we'll do some error handling here, very simple error handling. So if we can't open the file, we're going to say that the status is an error. We are going to not open to-do file, and we will exit the program. Let's also open our let's open up our dictionary also. This is where we're going to store the we keep track of what the next ID is. Do our same error handling, just to as we all know, that should never actually happen, but let's just keep our coding good here. Okay, so we've opened both our files we need. Next thing we need is to get what the request method was sent in. And so remember, we did a get. So in our program here, we need to get a request header. And then we just do a case group to do our dispatching of the different methods we get. So we say begin case, and we will say case request method equals a get, and our ID is not equal to blank. I'm sorry, and our ID is equal to blank. We will do a go sub area to do this. Go sub get all to-dos. And what we're going to do here, just so we can see error handling, we will have a catch-all case that will say, hey, something didn't happen here, right? So we'll say JSON status equal error, and we're going to say JSON status message equals invalid action, and I'll actually, for debugging purposes, say that the request method equals request method in case. And then we will go down here and start building our things. Now, in building this, this is basically going to become a template for handling this, is that I found that getting one item is the same as getting 10 items, except for with 10, you call the getting function 10 times. So when I do this one, I'm going to create an array, which is going to be our results. If the person's doing a get to read one record, there's obviously going to be one item in the array. If they do a get where they want multiple records, there'll be multiple items. So to keep my coding simple, what I'm going to actually do is write getting one record first. So I'm going to go in here and say case request method equals get, and ID is not equal to blank, and go sub get one to do. So what I'm going to do down here then is I'm going to write getting one record first. So get one to do. Now for error handling again, I'm going to say use this. So when I say, hey, read to do rec from to do file ID else no record equals 1 and return. That way I can return and do some error handling there. Also, I needed ID. So remember, when it's a get to get one to get all items, it is just against the ID. To get a particular item, you then do a slash the next thing, and we're going to actually demonstrate that up here. So easy ways, just go to the network. We've been calling it here. We can double click it. So that should get me one record, and if we do that against an ID, it should get me just that one record. Now remember, we haven't actually done anything yet, but what that means is we need our ID. So we're going to go up here and also get our parameter, which will be what it returns and which we want. So what this does automatically for you is parses this URL down, and so that's param1. If you could want to just pass more params on there, you can do with slashes, and so that would be 2, 3, and 4. So that should get us our 101. Now, what I'd also like to talk about here is debugging programs. It can be pretty tough because these things run in the background. One simple thing I like to do as I'm building these out is actually just return back some stuff. So we already started building our request object up here. Where did I create that? Right there. So we've got a response object there. And this gives you an opportunity to see how the object library works. Is I'm going to go ahead and create a debug object within that response, where I'm going to just basically send back what came in. So I'm going to say call w object against my response object, and I'm going to set an object in it. So I'm nesting an object within an object. And again, this is all in the documentation. I'm going to call this debug. This object's going to be debug. No more values sent in. No options. Now I can go into response object, and I can set items in there. And it's debug dot, and what I want to create as the next item in there. So I'm going to say, hey, what was the request method? And I'm going to pass back request method, no options, and I get our error. Again, you see it does return errors, and if I was doing even better coding here, I'd be doing some error handling around that. So response object, let's set in there, we want to set what the ID is. Okay. Look at the program. I think I have everything. Let's see how good I'm at this. So I didn't like what I called that subroutine. Get all to dos, get one to do, get one to do. All to dos do nothing right now. So now when I run this, you'll see that it has a debug item in there that has within it request method, ID, then another item for status. And notice we're now getting our error because nothing was really passed in. But if I go over here now and run it from our browser, it now tells me, hey, I did a get, I requested 101. If had it off, it's a get with no ID. So again, this is an easy way for me to debug it, where I can actually see data coming in and I'm just echoing things back out. And it also demonstrates how the WObject library is building you this nested objects for you. And to also demonstrate within the application that when this runs, and this will again demonstrate objects, is that there's that object put out, and you'll see that you can now, because it's an object, an actual JavaScript object, you can actually go right down through it and see. The items. Okay, so that worked. We've got our debugging, we've got our items in. Let's go down here and start to do some coding. Now, when I'm reading just one item, I actually want to do and return an error if it's not found. So I'm going to go down here and say, now, if no record, then we're going to return an error. So that will be JSON status equals error, JSON status message equals could not find ID. So I like to do a lot of interactive, write a little bit of code, test it. So then we will go to here and we will run it directly. So now we ask for a particular item, it's now returning with an error. Now if we list our to-do file, 105 is a valid ID, so let's change this to 105. It didn't return an error. And I think this is a good opportunity here to also talk about a better debugging program. So again, we're making all these calls over the web, so that's why you can sit here and type this right into the URL bar. But as you get into more and more sophisticated calls, it's not as easy to do within the browser. So the most popular testing tool out there is a product called Postman, Postman. It's free. It's pretty much a de facto testing tool, and it allows you to do a lot better testing, and it gives you a lot more information. So I already have this product installed and running. And so here's what the product looks like, and you can go right here and type in those same URLs. And you get the same output. Now, where the power of the product is, you can actually go in here and add headers. You can put in cookies. You can actually see the detail coming back. And a really impressive piece is that if you go over here and click on code, you can actually see what a web call looks like. This is actually what web protocol looks like. And as you're programming in other languages, like right now we're in App Studio, which is really producing JavaScript code. We could actually go right down here to JavaScript and see example code that you would cut and paste in those languages. So if you're working on a PHP system, all you have to do is go over here, and if you have a PHP curl module, this would be your code. If you have PHP, want to use this module, there it is. So this right here in code will call those REST services. And you can see that all sorts of languages are in here. There's even ones from Shell, which is also, I like to use curl, where you can go right here and if you have the curl executable program, you can do it from a command line, which is what allows you to make RESTful calls to any system that's doing REST services, as long as you can bang out and execute curl. So all PIC implementations allow you to bang out and execute operating system commands. So this is how I have over years called web APIs or called web pages. And you just do a capture result, and that will call that REST service and get the result. So great tool. And as we get into more sophisticated functions, we will have to use this tool to do the post and gets and other actions, which cannot so easily be done in the browser. So there we go. We're now calling the function. Now let's move on and actually get our record. So down here in a get all to-dos, we are going to start building our thing. Now, because I'm going to build this to where we can call this multiple times, and so the get all items, we'll call this get one. We need to be able to increment on how many records we're dealing with. So I'm going to go to the top of my program and set myself a variable called results control, and we'll set it initially to 0. And then we'll go down here and I like to do this for the object library, so I don't have to keep typing the full syntax for my variable. And since this tool now doesn't allow you to create an object and then nest it in another object like you would see me doing over the JavaScript, I have to do full pathing to it. So here I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to put all my results in a results array. So actually, let me go up here to the top and first add that into the object. And it's going to be an array. And it's going to be called results. No item, options, are error. And then to quickly show you what that did, because I know I'm running through some of this quickly. Debug, and there's results, and it's going to be an array. So that did that for us and put that item in there. So now we're going to go in and populate something in there. So we're going to say our pre is going to be in the results item, and which array position, which is going to be results.control. And remember with JavaScript, position 1 is 0. It's kind of like C-based languages. So in PIC, our arrays is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In JavaScript languages or any type of C-based language, it's actually 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's why you see me set it to 0. And I build that string out. And now I've got my record. And I'm now going to start populating my item. So W-object, response, object is what I'm modifying. I need to first put an object in there, which all I have to do is pass in pre. So if I didn't have the pre, I would actually be doing this. Okay, but then that number has to be dynamic. So again, by building us a variable up front, we can just do pre, pass in that. Again, we pass nothing on the create of these things. And again, to maybe step through this, you can see this almost step by step being built. If I debug through this on each one of these and let you see piece by piece it's being built. Now this didn't do anything because it didn't read a record, so it returned out. So if I go up here and run it here, you see there's now an object in there, an array of objects. And there's the first object. Objects, arrays. So I've created the object. Now I can go and start putting items in the object. Set a string, it's pre, and now I can just say and concatenate dot what I want. So I want to put the ID in there. ID. Again, we'll do this quick so you can see it as it's slowly being built. And this time we'll go use Postman since that's what I said we should be testing this with. So 105, send, see results, and now you see a field in there, an ID. Now we won't go do each one now, we'll just go ahead and type the rest of them in there. So call W object, response object, set string, pre, and next one I want is date. We're going to actually convert it as we send it out. This is a pic format, so we're going to convert it to output. To-do record 2 is our time. MTH, let's just do an MTH. So you can do a MTS if you wanted to. And W object, response object, set our string. And we are going to send to rec3. No conversion, so it's just end. And then we're going to increment our results variable. Let's compile this. And there's all my data now. All right, so now we can get one record. Now we want to get all the records. So now we are going to go up to our get all to-dos. And build it out. Now this is where you could actually pass in, if it was an invoicing system or something, you can actually do any of the selections you need to do here. And for this particular application, we're just selecting all our items. So I'm just going to do let's go ahead and select them in order. And then we are going to loop through them, read. And then we are going to go sub get one to do. That's why we built the other one first. So now that should, if we call that exit function, it should loop through them all and get them all for us. So let's do it from Postman. So send gets one with no item sent. It should get all. So get ID, and when something does not work, this is a good opportunity to show some debugging, is it ran in the background. Now on JBase we have a function that lists runtime error, so you can actually see running error. So let's first look there, and we can also look possibly in the output here and see if it said anything, which it does not. We'll go over here. Okay, so let me see, that ran 11:53. It did say 2 records selected, and then it generated an error here. Now, there's a few different ways to debug when this stuff happens. You know, I'm gonna run the program right here, and we have no action sent because nothing's getting passed in. Well, we can actually just go right to our program and say, for debugging purposes, let's just go ahead and punch something in there to see what this did. So I'm actually going to go over here where request method was grabbed and say, just for temporarily, why don't I just force request method to equal a get. And I'm going to have another whole video that I'll talk in more depth about other options for doing debugging, but this is one option. So when I ran this, there's your results, and it came back, and I'm looking at this and going, okay, this does seem to be returning a data. So what if I go over here and run it? It returned both my records. And let's go back to Postman where I did this. And it's returning multiple records. So I'm going to go back up here and take out what I did here. And make sure I have results control in here, right? Results control, okay. So now that's out, so we're gonna go in here and rerun it again. And it works, so I just must not compile it. So there she's running. I got my multiple records. We go back to our application, because our application is still sitting and waiting. We will refresh it again. And we look here, you can see here's the response, and here it is in a debug mode where you can go through it. So here's our results. You can click on it, see result 0, result 1, click on that, there's first record, there's second record. And then you see it also in the console output where I sent it back. All right, so now we have our list of records. Let's move on and actually start to do it in our application. So we'll go back to this basic editor. And what we're going to now do is populate our list control with those responses. And that will be done here in this program, which is did our response. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to save this away, this answer. So we're going to go up here and create a variable that's global. And then we're going to go over here and say our to-dos is going to equal our response.results. Remember when the object came back, all our to-dos, all our records are in the results object. So I say Dwayne to-dos. Then I can actually say, hey, how many were there? Number to-dos equals response dot, I can actually even do it against to-dos here. So to-dos dot length. Standard object syntax that should come back with a number of items. So I'm actually going to console log out because I like to do that. So number items equals number to-dos. And then we're going to set our to-do panel footer to equal found number of to-dos items. Now let's deploy this. You'll see as I do this type of debugging, it redeploys, and I usually just close a new window and refresh this one. So it ran through here, and look, it right here, number items 2, and look, our footer is now populated. For further debugging, what I'm going to switch it over to is, I kept saying start a desktop browser, but you can also switch to deploy to local folder. I think it essentially does the same thing. The reason I like this one better than the other one is I'll go over here and say, get my window set up the way I like it. When I do a future deploy, I'll just say no, and then go over here and just tell it to refresh, and I get the latest version. So again, 2 items. So let's move on and actually populate our item. So we're going to do for x equals 1 to number of to-dos. Our result is going to equal our to-dos x minus 1. Remember, this is JavaScript, so it is 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then our next line is to actually start building out items into our to-do list group. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, just for debugging, because you know I like to do console logs, I'm going to do console log result. I need to take the stuff out when you go to production because it will slow it down. Then we're going to build our line. I'm going to keep it real simple. I'm just going to say the line is going to equal the result dot date and a space, and result dot time and a space, and result dot message. Keep it real simple. Then do a to-do list group, add the item, and we're just going to add our line. And we enter function, and up here at the top, I want to also make sure I clear out the control. Now, let's go ahead and deploy our application out. Tell it to refresh. And we now have our 2 tasks in the panel. And again, you can see in our debugging output that I told the number of items. Remember, I told it to debug as it hit each item. You can again see how the objects are working. So I pulled out the first task. There's the object. Here's the second task. And again, this is a good representation here of the object programming that most modern languages have. So, you know, it came in through response. I was able to pull out just the to-do object out. Then I was able to list through each one of the to-dos, and then pull out each to-do as a single object before I can reference it. But it's still always called in the syntax. And I'd like to also at this point out that the object library we have here is doing very similar syntax. And if you're on a version of PIC that actually is natively supporting objects such as QM does right now, and JBase will be shortly, you'll at that point be able to replace lines like this with syntax more along this line, which would be more like response object debug request method equals request method. And then you can see the syntax is very similar to the syntax using JavaScript, other than we having to use a dash gator versus a dot, because as we all know in PIC we use dots in our variable names. Okay, so we now are populating our to-do list with a list of items. So what's next? Next is being able to click on one of these and actually see it. So what we're going to do first is go back over to our application, and we're going to go to the to-do list, and we're going to go in over here to events and say on click we want to do some things. So our code for this will be, first of all, I like to always do some debugging output. So now we know we're in there, and what we're going to do is we need to pull an item up. So give me one quick second here. Because I've been using this package for a while, it has this weird, it may be a bug in it where it will actually send two events in, and so I find myself having to say, if the choice that was sent in, and up here we need to make sure that was passed in, is an object, then we don't want to run this function. We want only the one that fires off, and I'll show you that in the debugger. This is where you get to learn how all these little controls work. Now, first thing we need to do is get the ID. So what's going to get passed through choice is the integer number of the item in the list you clicked on. And since we before got all our to-dos, we saved away in a global variable in to-dos, I can get the actual ID here by saying ID equals to-dos choice, which is the index that you've selected, dot ID. And again, for debugging, we're going to say, hey, console log the choice is now. Before we actually do something, let's just see. Let's debug that and make sure that works. Go back to our application. Let's reload it. And see, to-do list was clicked. The choice is 0, and the ID is 105. And if you're curious on how that object syntax looks, we can go right up into our application and tell to, hey, console log to do And this is a good thing here. You can see, what's nice about this debugger is it, very interactive. You can click on code, go look at the actual sent code. In this case, I'm probably just typed in the name wrong. It's plural. Loaded, click on it, and see right here it's sent out the to-do object. So you see when I look at it, there's your object, to-dos, there is 0, ID. So that's how that worked and got out there. Okay, so now let's move on to actually going and getting our record. And even though technically our to-dos has all our information, for purposes of this demo, I am going to go and make a new call to go get the information. So let's go down here, and we are going to do an AJAX call to our URL And now we are going to add another parameter on it. We always want to encode anything we put onto the command line. Therefore, if you have any reserved letters and stuff, it will actually clean that up for us. We want to do a get. We're not passing any data. And when it returns, it wants to run the load to do function. So we've finished that out. Now we need to go down and create our function for load to do, getting a response back. We're going to console log that we are in load to do. We are going to like to see what the return response was. And now we're going to start populating the record. And this actually, first we have to actually make a new form to put all this information in. So what we're going to do is go up here and create a new form. Just hit plus, and a new form is created. We're going to go in here, and we are going to rename it to be our to-do form. For purposes of this one, I'm going to make it a model. So it's going to pop up. And then we're going to go ahead and start putting some fields on here. So we go right over here, we have our bootstrap controls. We're going to drop some controls on here. I'm actually going to go over here to the form and make the form a relative. So tell each one of the controls to also be positioned that way. Let me see here. Screen mode. And here's our control. So let's go through here and let's start setting it up. So this first one is going to be, let's rename the field. It's going to be ID. We want it to be called input ID. It is going to be a text, and it is going to be read only. True and ID. Now, okay, so we have our ID, and let's add our other fields. Just shoot through here real quick. We'll add another input. Add so date, time, message. Then we are going to put a save button and a delete button. And again, what's neat about this software package, it's got built into the ID most of the controls and align stuff with this, so you can just go right through here, as we did in the first one, and do them. So, date. We're going to call this input date. It is actually a date control. And we are going to, and yes. Go to the next one. Header is time. Input time. Header time. Make this read only. Get to our last one, which is really the only one we're going to allow input. And we're going to say this is, I think it's, let's say this is the to-do message. Let's input message. It's a text field. And actually, let's take that out for a second. Let's actually make that a text area so we can put more stuff in there. So see how quickly I just pulled that control out, put that one in there, tell it to move it up, and now we have a text area. So to do message, input message, and with this one we'll go down here and say let's let it have 5 rows and enter your task, your to do item. Now let's clean up our buttons. Let's go over here and we'll make that a primary button. We will say we are going to group them horizontal. We are going to call it the button save, and what the text of it is. Then we can go to the second button. Let's do it a danger. The grouping is the end. The ID is button delete, and the value is delete. So we've now created a form for showing our pop-up when we click on an item. So now we're going to go back to the main form and go back to our function we were working on after you click on it, and now we can start populating those. And so in this product, this is what it named all the fields, and you can just right here say input id dot value equals our response dot results. And remember, we sent back, even a single item is in an array and it's in results. And actually to do this the right way for it's less typing, we'll actually say our let's just say our record will equal results and the first item. So then over here we can actually just reference our record.id, input date.value equals record.date. Let's type these up, keep them all straight. Input time.value equal record.time. Input message.value equals record.message. Then we tell it to do form show and our function. Now this when you see this type of navigation stuff, again, this is the way that this product is handling all your MVC and your movements and all that stuff. If you're using Angular or some other product, this stuff would be done here differently. Again, this product is very straightforward, very simple, and so it's, again, a lot more like Visual Basic was. So let's now go ahead and deploy. Go to our application. And there we have it, popped it up, and then got our item. Now, I'm looking at this going with a date, and the times weren't filled out, and it's probably because of formatting. So I'll close that. Let's go back over into our editor. I don't also like the colors. So let's go over here and say that this is just text versus a date control. Since it's all read-only, there's no reason for us to do that. So we're just going to make them text. So it just shows exactly what I had it do. I'm going to go over here and change the background color over here to white, and actually probably on the form when you do that, background color white. Okay. There's our date and time, the first one, second one. So now we've that quickly built a form. Again, you know, what's neat about this all being Bootstrap, it automatically is resizing stuff as the screen's made bigger and smaller. So you can see how the ID tags moved. They're here, they're on top, but as the screen gets wider and wider, they move to the left. You know, that's Bootstrap, that's what's called responsive. And again, it's doing most of all this, it's doing everything automatically for us. So now we can pull up an item and look at it. Now let's go ahead and make it to where we can update the item. So let's go back to our ID. And so when the save button is clicked, we want to update our record. So we're going to click on our button, go over here to events, unclick, and let's start doing our action for that. So once again, that's console log that we are in the save. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually create an object to send all items back. So I'm going to just call it payload. But it's basically the reverse of what we did when we populated it. So we're going to go in and say payload date equals input id dot value. So in this case, we've now created a JavaScript object. Our ID, we want to save is on the screen too, so we'll go ahead and grab that. So now we can, let's console log out our payload, so you can, I'll show you in the debugger what that looks like. And then we are going to call our Ajax function, and we are going to pass this in. So URL plus our ID we are going to do a put. Then we are going to send our payload, which we say JSON in this product, stringify our payload. And then we're going to create a function for when it returns. And we're going to here now and say, and we're just going to use a default function for this. Default response. So here's our default response. Then we are going to use our built-in pop-up box, message box, and we're going to say our response.status message, and then what question mark we want on the screen. Again, this is all in their documentation how these items work. And then we're going to have some error checking that says if it was a good response, then we want to recall our function that gets all our items. Again, this is a very simple app. And then I'm going to hide our form. All right. Here's our record. There it is. We click save, and I expected it to blow up because we haven't done our put function over on our pick side, and this is also another opportunity for you to see more security coming in. So as we start doing things where we can do updates, and because we are in cores mode right now, another security item is kicking in. And you can also see here that I obviously mistyped console, so let's go fix that real fast. So now I'm going to go over here to the pick side, and I need to first deal with the this error, which is, hey, method put is not allowed. Now what's important to note here is on its own, the browser security overrode the request I was making right here, and instead of it being a put, it did an options. And you can look this up, it's called cores. And so what happens is that the browser on its own will make an options request to the server. The server is supposed to then respond with what type of cookies and actions and methods that this function is supposed to allow, and then the browser will honor that, and if those things don't match up, it'll actually stop the call. It's actually the browser doing it. So again, this has nothing to do with this product. This is classic security that's added, and so we can now go into our application, and we can add these features to the top. And remember, it's going to come now as an option. So I'm going to go up to the top of my program and say, we need to do it after here. We'll actually say, if the request method equals options, then we need to respond with some headers. And we're going to say, hey, first, what type of headers do we allow? Content, type, and I'm going to put authenticated in here, which we're not using it, but later when we start talking about web token security and security, I want to be clear here, this is a demo app, and we're doing no session security or anything. I'm just keeping this very simple to show you how you get started. Type, authentication, and we'll allow cookies. And the most important thing here is, again, we kept everything open, so you have access to everything you need access to. So when these things happen, you go on the internet, find out how in Node they would set this up, and you can go right in here and do the same thing in our product and just set the headers. Get, put, post, delete. All right. Now, because we're just going to dump out this program, we're going to do a call w send nothing and stop. There's no reason for the rest of this program to run if it did an options call. All right, we're going to compile our program. Go up to our application and let's clear all this out and hit the save button again. And you'll see it, well, forgot we had a mistyped thing, so let's redeploy. Save. So there was the options call. And response came back, because we didn't see anything back, but the response headers should have said our stuff. I see it not doing it. Method put. So did again. Okay, so let's look at our program. Did I mistype something? Well, yeah, see, classic classic screw-up is that I'm actually pulling the request method all the way down here and try to reference it up here. So if we ran the program straight from Tickle, we would have seen this variable not assigned type error. So let's fix that. In fact, I'll show that here. If we, before we compile it, it says non-initialized variable. Now let's go ahead and to do BP to do routine. So let's run it again to do routine, and there she is. And see, now it's kicking out these headers. So now let's go up and fill this out. Let's go into the network tab. Let's clear all this out. Go to console. Let's clear this out. Let's run this again. Alright, it's still not liking it. So there's to do. Access control allow headers, so we put our actions in there. Access control allow origin. So what did it say it didn't like? Access control allow methods. See, I typed that wrong when I typed it in the program. So this was supposed to be methods. I went ahead and have these type of mistakes in here so you can actually see how, when you're doing this, how I would do debugging and how I'd find things. Because this is all common stuff to make mistakes. So let's run it again. And this time it didn't generate an error, but since we haven't built the put function into our function yet, it came back and said you can't do this. There's no put function. If we go to the network, I'd like to show you what it did is here, remember it overrode it and did an options call, which is that new code we put in and says, hey, I allow these methods. And then the browser said, okay, the code requested to do a put, you're allowing a put. So it then went and actually ran the function I was asking, which was, hey, we're doing this, a put, to this function, this ID, and if you scroll down, you're going to see here in the form data our payload. Now, this particular product, and I'm not going to go heavily into this on this one, is still got the content type set to application www form URL encoded. We should have switched it to application JSON. The multi-platform one right now will not parse down the body if this is www form URL encoded, while the JBase one will send the raw body in, even though this content type is technically wrong. So that's why I'm doing this demo on JBase. To get around the issue, I just write my own wrapper around the AJAX function and set the content type correctly. So I just want to throw that out. I'll have that in the notes down below to show you how to do that. It's really not an issue with the product, but we have decided on the next patch that the multi-platform one will work like the JBase JAgent one, and will still send the raw body even when it is form URL encoded. So with that in mind, let's go over to the pick side and build our put function. So we go down into our code and say case the request method equals a put and ID is not equal to blank. We are going to basically say, hey, let's read and update the record. And it's important here that I'm following pure REST design here, where a put is to update a record and expects it already to exist. A post action is to add a new item and it expects it not to exist. That's a little different than what we normally do in pick, where we just read a record and write it. Again, as you're writing your REST services, you can actually just have these both do the same thing. Just keep in mind that by pure REST syntax, it's not what it's supposed to be doing, because remember on SQL, they have a separate insert versus update function. So I'm going to go ahead and create a separate Go sub area to do my updating of a record. And let's scroll down the bottom here, and we will create our update record area. And remember, what we're going to basically do here now is read in our record. So I'm going to do the same thing for error handling. I'm going to read my to-do rec from to-do file ID else no record equals 1. I'm going to do some I'm going to have a separate area here to handle our error handling. You'll understand as I do the next one. So right now I'm going to say case the request method was a put and no record. I'm going to go here and say the is going to be an error, and I'm doing this so I can customize the message. No record to update put action, and return out. And I'm going to say K, and we'll do the next one as we build the other function. Now, we need to update our record. So the first thing we're going to do is call and get that body. And remember, this function sent our JSON in as the body. So we're just going to return it out. And then we're going to call our object library, which is going to take from a JSON and build us an object from that body, which was JSON. So now I have, then I can call against body object and get my different fields out of it. So remember date, get my my timeout. Get my message out. And something I want to throw out here, and this is why it's important to understand that what we're doing here in REST is not ODBC. This is it's supposed to be a business function, and this is where you would have your opportunity to call your business logic, do calculations, do error handling, everything you would normally do within a PIC application before you perhaps wrote the record out, you could do right here. You could massage things, you can say, I don't like something you did, return it back. This is the real power here, and this is where normally you could actually interface with your existing PIC functions and call your standard business logic. Now, all we're going to do is we're going to turn around and update our record. And in this case, we need to convert these. In fact, the first one I need to do and convert this from a date. And here we are going to, from a time, and this is to do message. We're going to write our record back. Our ID. And then we are going to set up our status message, our JSON status message. It's going to equal saved ID and return. I want to here just make sure that I am consistent. See, it's actually supposed to be message and not MSG. Got that one before. Okay, so let's go and compile our program. Didn't throw an error, so let's go over here and save. It returned back with a successful that it saved 105. Remember, we added some text to it, so it should rerun the get, and it should have updated over there. So I didn't see it, so sure we missed something. So let's go and look and see what it did on the PIC side. To do that, well, I think it actually did work. So let's click on this one. Test one. Oh, there it is. To do test one. So we have now successfully updated the record. So let's go in here and test it one more time. Take it out. Perfect. So now we have completed our third function. So we can now do a get, list all the items. We can now update an item. And the other action that was on that screen was to delete an item. So we will go in here, go to our button delete. Now we need to add a event for that one. Console log button delete. we have our ID, again, input ID value. We can now say Ajax URL plus passing our ID. We want to send a delete action, no data to send in, and we will call the same default response action. Deploy it out. And it's a good thing. So you see here, I must have mistyped something, so I'll just click here, and it goes right down here and says, "Oh, I missed the line here." So I'm going to go and look at my code. So I left a quote at the end of delete. All right, let's go reload our page again. Let's pull the second task. And now, and remember, we haven't built the other side of the function yet. So I'm going to hit delete. And it gets an error from the function because we don't have a delete action. So now let's go down to our PixSide program and now say, okay, ID is not nothing. We're going to go sub delete a record. To the bottom of our code here. And all we're really going to do is real simple, delete our to-do file, ID, deleted ID, and return. And again, I'm keeping this simple. This is where, again, where you would, on your pick side, perhaps have a lot more logic here, reuse your current logic. Compile our program. Let's just again, we don't have to redo anything here because we haven't changed anything on the JavaScript application. So I'm going to run delete, and now it says it's done a delete, and because I refreshed the record, there that is. We go back over to our JBase system and list our file out. You see our item done. So now we that quickly got delete, update, and list and read records. The last one is we need to be able to add a new record. So let's go to our application, go back to our main form. Let's get another button. That button will be primary. We'll call it button add. We will say add task, and then we will move it up. I'd like to see it up here at the top. Again, you know, as you're getting in and designing this, you may not like the way everything's smashed together, and instead of having to learn CSS and all that, you can just actually go in here and say, let's do a 5px margin all the way around, and the button's now spaced. Let's go up to our events. On click. And now what we're going to do when the person does an add. And this is probably the, I did some reuse here, so I can just reuse the same other functions I have in here, and I'll show you how I do that. First we're going to do here is is we're going to be pulling the form up. We want to set the values initially, and we're just going to call it a new item and input date will be date, because this is again emulating Visual Basic. It actually already has action variables, date and time, that kind of like picks date pren and time pren. So I didn't have to get deep into the JavaScript actions for doing that. So in this particular thing, I chose to populate date and time from this side. You could have just have easily left those blank and put the actions on the pick side. And then we're going to do the same thing to do form.show. So this should now, when you click new, will bring up a new form. Now, when you hit the save button now, which is over here on this form, and we hit the save button, we need to adjust the actions a little bit. So when now you do a save, because when you do a new item, you need to be a post versus a put. So what I'm going to do in this function is put a little bit of conditional logic, and I know it's a new item because I made the ID equal the word new item. So I'm going to go over here, and again, this is just how I'm doing this as a demo. It's probably not the smartest way, but it does work. Then I'm going to create a new variable called action, and I'm going to say the action should be a post then, and then else the action is going to be a put. Opportunity to say here that, you know, it's really nice that this is visual, this is basic, but you can see that the syntax of some of these things are just a little different than pick basic. But I find that I got used to these much faster than I got used to JavaScript's syntax. So the only change we're going to put here is this is going to be a post versus a put. Oh, I'm sorry, action. Let's deploy the app out. Didn't like something I did. I probably forgot to end the function up there, so let's go here. Function on click. I have a though opportunity to see a tougher one here. It's saying it doesn't like illegal return statements, so I have ones floating out here in space. So what I usually do when I see something like this, I say, okay, I hit the button add, and I have an on-click action here. And so you can see here where it's rewritten our pick basic as JavaScript. So this lines up with here. So I'd usually go to my button add and say, what did I do wrong here? Oh, you can see that. So I aired the screen down. I actually had it the word end function in there twice. So now I have my add button. When I click it, it brings up a blank screen. Here's my new task. Has date and time filled out. When I hit save, it should come back and fail because we haven't built the post action on the pick side yet. So now we finish up our last one of the group, which is case post, and ID is not equal to nothing. Then we want to do our work. Now here, because we are doing a post with no record, we need to do a little bit more work here, and so we need to get a new ID, because we're not going to actually save it as a new ID. So I'm going to sit right here and say, and remember I had the dictionary open, and that's where I'm storing the next ID to use. So I'm going to do a review of our next ID from dictionary of to do file. Again, this is your application already should have something for doing this type of activity. You just be tying right into your existing stuff. Here I'm making just a very simple sequential ID function. So I'm going to write my new one back on my file. And if it doesn't exist, it just starts our numbering at 100. Set our ID to what we got, and then go, and then let's call update record. So we'll call the same program. But what we're going to do is we're going to go into that program now and do our second case group, because if in true REST, if you've done a put, it shouldn't exist. So case request method equals a post and not no record, meaning you're asking to add a record, but the read statement came back true that there is already a record. We are going to say that you're trying to write record. And again, I'm just showing you true REST syntax here. If you didn't want to implement that type of security and just say, hey, on a post and a put, I just always update records, then go ahead. REST is not a, hey, you violate the rules. It's not REST. REST is still, a lot of this is recommended ways for things to work. And so that's more of a SQL-ish thing. The rest of the code is going to stay the same. So in this case, it got a new ID on an add item. It has some error checking. Let's compile. Our program. Again, we made no change on this side. So now when we save it, it should save it, and it says, hey, I saved it as 107, got a successful, and here it is. Now, my first thing is when I look at it, I go, well, that doesn't look right. It looks like I didn't get the date over. So now I'll just go debug that part of the function. Obviously on a save, it sent here, it sent a save over, and see, date, new item, time. So you can see right here when I built the object, I obviously built the object wrong. So I'm gonna go back over here. See, payload.date should be equal to ID date. And see, if you wanted for redundancy, you could always have put ID in there. Again, this part of the protocol and everything is pretty open to what you want to do. But the truth is, by spec, they pass the ID on the URL bar. But here I'm going to show you can be redundant and put here, because it's code on one side, code on the other side. You're accessing it. So let's deploy this out. Go back into our application. We need to reload it. Let's actually delete this one. Let's add a new one.
Yeah, I'm loading the data on.
And this time it worked. So now here's our new one for today, 12:15. Here's my new task. And there we go. So we have now built a simple to-do app that demonstrates all 4 of the functions and demonstrates your code on the pick side and your application on this side. And it also shows that in this, using this tool, it's all perfectly responsive and handles all the smaller screens. And then when you're in like a Chrome debugger, you can actually click right here and pick different device types and test it. So here it is on a Galaxy S5. Run right through your app. So there you go. Thank you for going through this. I hope I have demonstrated how this functionally works. It's very important, and I did the detail on this video to show you the detail of what's going on. The truth is these things always become frameworks, and so as you start seeing the program that's been written both on the pick side, you can start recognizing that there is repetitive stuff here. This is basically a template, and you could reuse this basic template over and over again. There's also a lot of discussion of, hey, why don't we make this more dynamic, and you can actually make it more like ODBC and pass things in and pass things out. There are specifications around like Facebook's GraphQL, Couchbase is doing N1QL. There is specs out there talking around this. Again, that's why I felt it was very important to show you from a coding standpoint. Everything is here and everything is available, and you can build out anything you want in here. As you start to build out consistent stuff, I entirely see you building functions or modules that will start doing repetitive work. For example, at the top here where it sets the options here, that could easily just be a subroutine that you call and put in here. You may choose to put this whole item in a wrapper and start doing it. Where I want to be very important here is we have to walk before we run. And therefore, this package right here is giving you core functionality just as a core Perl module would have given you, or a basic Node with its Express modules. As we move on to next, we can start putting in more packages and automation in here that starts doing repetitive stuff. But we have to have these features in here with the ability to modify and overload them whenever you need to build out whatever you're doing next. So this function now will be able to interact with any REST service. And as you run into unique features that a developer did, meaning they are choosing to pass certain things back and forth through headers to handle certain things, you can go in here and add that. Chrome comes out with new security, you're able to go in here and add it. On the application side, I hope this package here is free for use. They do have a paid version, just like most sites do, with hosting and all that, but I found that you can get pretty much everything you want to do through the free package. It creates, again, completely client-side applications. Even if it's not the tool you choose to use long-term, I find it was the easiest tool for me to get going and starting to understand how these applications are working. It's not a full-feature MVC framework like Angular would be. And what I mean by that is, as a framework, a more sophisticated environment will create whole classes and views, and as you build a form, you wouldn't be forced to be writing code as I did here to say, hey, I need to populate the values or go get them and put them into a database. It would have a whole framework that would be looking like it's doing all that for you. So I highly recommend, if that's the type of thing you would like, is to go look at Angular or React or more sophisticated ones. This one is keeping things very simple, very straightforward. You're writing the code. You can go in here and actually start building more functions. So just like we talked about in the pick side, you might find yourself here in this product building out more automation and framework and tools. So again, excellent tool, very quick. I would point out here that you can actually click right here and say make native app with PhoneGap, and it will compile this down into a app. And here in a moment, it'll actually have a download link for the Android. So you could actually now go to this URL, download an APK file that this has created, install it on your phone, and you now have an app, a standalone app versus a web page. And it does create an iOS one also, but you have to, being Apple, you have to go through the store and do a few more steps. But it has created it. It will actually even create a Windows executable, which is kind of a Chrome store type application. It can use PhoneGap CLI. It has all sorts of features. It can do deploying to your web server automatically if you have secure FTP and FTP. So again, wonderful product. Again, this product has nothing to do with JBase per se. It's actually a development environment out there for hitting whatever your backend REST services are. So once again, I just was able to demonstrate how this can call into it. Again, if you're using any other environment, I don't care if it's Xamarin, I don't care if it's Visual Studio and using their web forms, you're able to use their package, their tools to build your UI and then make the same style AJAX calls. The functionality there is identical. So again, thank you so much, and I appreciate your time, and look forward to seeing your feedback, and I will have more videos coming up to start demonstrating security, deploying, debugging, and all other features. So again, thank you for watching, and have a great day.